Hi, I'm Jacqueline.
And I'm Courtney, and this is Caffeinated Crimes.
Welcome back to another week of true crime updates and Courtney and Jacqueline bullshitting and sad stories and what you've come to know and love as Caffeinated Crimes.
Yes, all we talk about is sad stuff now, it feels like. Sorry, but...
Which I guess we knew we were getting into that with a true crime podcast. But, sometimes it'd be nice to have something just a little bit lighter, maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
But not today.
Not today. It's going to be... This one is a rough one. I'd never heard of this case. It's rough. And now we're going to tell you sad things to start with. So...
I know this makes you want to keep listening to the end for sure, doesn't it?
So the first one we have is there was a man named Liddell Lee who was executed by lethal injection in Arkansas in 2017. But now, 4 years later, new DNA testing revealed that the genetic material on the murder weapon, which was never previously tested, just keep that in mind,
Yep.
in fact belongs to another man. So basically, this man was killed and he had probably nothing to do with the crime.
And how do you get through a capital murder trial, a death sentence, all of the appeals that we know come along with that, and the DNA on the murder weapon was never even tested? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, I don't understand. And this kind of reminds me of the case we did last week with Molly, and it's you never tested the shorts to see if it was blood.
Right?
Isn't that just your first thing you do when you're about to go to a trial? Let me test everything. But yeah, especially when someone's on death row. I think this kind of goes back to why Caffeinated Crimes as a podcast is kind of against the death penalty, because it's this person was killed and they were innocent. And one person who dies who's innocent is too much. So exactly. It's really easy in the Ted Bundy cases to be yeah, let that bitch fry. But there's so many other small cases that probably don't get news, like this one, had never really heard of it, where innocent people do die because of wrongful convictions.
That's the thing, the death penalty as a whole, like you said, if one person is wrongfully murdered by the state, that's too many, and we know that it's been way more than one person, so just really, really sad, and I don't know, maybe one day that will change.
In a world with a perfect justice system where it gets it right every single time and there's no bias, 100% on for the death penalty, but we don't live in that world and I don't think we ever will.
No.
So.
Agreed. And speaking of sad things and jumping into our new shooting segment, which we, again, don't love and are tired of doing, but here we are. This is the only one that we're aware of this week. There may be others. We're really sorry if we missed them. This is the only one that we heard about. But a 6th grade girl did bring a gun to Rigby Middle School in Idaho, and she did shoot and wound 2 students and a custodian before being disarmed by a teacher. So all 3 of the victims were shot in limbs, and they are all expected to survive. So no deaths yet. This was a couple of days ago, so it is looking pretty good for them. But 6th grade, you're 11 years old.
So young.
I don't know what mental health issues have to be present there or how you even got access to a weapon at that age, which is the main issue that people are talking about, but just so sad and tragic all around.
Yeah, it's just so sad, and we just keep seeing this, and it's when's it gonna end? They keep getting younger and more frequent, and it's absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And the trauma that these kids now in middle school, you're gonna be scared, probably for the rest of your school career, and that might even make going to college hard, because you're ugh, I don't know, I have to sit in a classroom for another 4 years when this happened previously. A lot of trauma there.
Yeah, that's just always stuck in the back of your head. I mean, I feel even when we were in school, that's something that you always thought about, but we've never personally experienced it. But once you do personally experience that fear, how do you come back from that,
Yeah, and I would remember in college even, like anytime like I had a new class or whatever, I'd be like look around and be like, okay, how would I exit, or where would I hide, like what would I do? And I've never like been at a school that had a school shooting or anything like that.
Yep.
So that is just me being like, I know this happens, I gotta watch. So I can't even imagine those kids who like were shot especially, but like also just were there or saw it or heard it or whatever.
Absolutely. Just so sad.
All right, now that we've thoroughly depressed you, we are going to depress you even more because this one is a rough one. This one was suggested by Jenny. And Jenny, I don't know what you're reading, but this case is fucked up, man.
Yeah, thanks for this, Jenny. We appreciate it.
But it is very important, and I've never heard of it. And it was such a big case. So we are going to go ahead. I'm going to start with a little bit of a trigger warning because it is very heavy on like sexual assault, child sexual abuse, and talks of child porn. So I just want to let you know, like going into it, if that's something you cannot handle, 100% understand. We will see you next week.
Yes.
So our sources for today was Murderpedia, Marc Dutroux, The Monster of Belgium documentary, the New York Times, a France 24 article, Brussels Times, and AP News. So we used all those sources. So Julie Lejeune, who was 8, and Melissa Rousseau, who was also 8, went missing from a park near their home in Gros-Hallenier. I hope I pronounced that right. I tried to write things out phonetically, but it might not be perfect, so sorry.
We try our best, you know.
Yes, but that happened on June 25th, 1995. So the two girls were best friends, and they were last seen waving at passing cars. The police did not provide their parents with much help, so they took it upon themselves to hang thousands of missing posters on lampposts, shop windows, bus stops, and train stations. So just trying to get their kids, like, names and faces out there the best they could. And then in August 1995, Anne Marchal, who was 17, and Jeffe Lambrix, who was 19, went on a camping trip to Blankenberg with friends. And Anne's father, Paul, had some worries about this vacation. It'd be her first vacation without her parents, and he just had a lot of, like, hesitation about it and wasn't sure if it was the best idea. But she did end up going with her friends, and during their trip, Anne and Jeffe attended a hypnosis show on the 22nd. So while on stage, they're actually filmed by a member of the audience, so you can see this footage, and it is really kind of hindsight very haunting. Mm-hmm. So the next day, Paul got a call from some of the friends that Anne and Jeffe had not returned from the show that night, and they were last seen getting off a streetcar near the beach at Ostend after the show. So Paul met with officials the next day, and he was just really alarmed at how unconcerned they seemed. And he just asked, like, what are you going to do? Like, are you going to start searches? You know, whatever. And they're like, don't worry about it. They'll be back. They just went looking for adventure. So common theme in all our cases.
Yes, the police are just like, oh, yeah, no. They just ran away. They just did this. They whatever. They'll be back. No, guys.
Like, especially because, like, one of them was 17. Like, she's, like, a minor. I mean,
yeah.
The ones previous, they were 8 years old, and they're still just like, meh, whatever. It's fine.
8-year-olds
They just ran away.
Don't run away, guys.
Yeah. So, Paul is obviously not happy with this response. I don't think any parent would be with a missing child. So he goes home and starts his own campaign to try and find his daughter. So he made posters, and he also started to conduct searches. So at this point, Julie and Melissa are still missing, but they have been abducted 100 miles south of Blankenberg. So in February 1996, the parents of Julie, Melissa, Ann, and Jeffe are still searching for their children. And Paul says at this point he realizes, I'm most likely searching, like, for their bodies and not necessarily, like, for them to come home, like, alive, which it just has to be heartbreaking as a parent to, like, have that realization, like, they're not going to come home alive.
Yeah, like, you know, like, this is over, but I still want to bring their bodies home, and I'm still going to fight to bring their bodies home. Like, I can't even imagine that feeling.
In May 1996, Sabine Darden, 12, began her ride to school as usual when she was kidnapped in Caen. So at this point, there is a lot of, missing children and young girls, and so they did form a task force so they can combine all the investigations since the disappearances were happening so far apart. So I know like Julie and Melissa were 100 miles away from Anne and Hefe, and I'm not sure about Sabine, but also pretty far away.
Mm-hmm.
And Albert Preem was one of the lead investigators, and he said at this point, they have absolutely no clue who could be doing this. They're like, we don't know. No leads, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
10 weeks later, there are still no leads, and another young girl is kidnapped on August 9th. So Leticia Delhay was 14, and she was walking home from her local swimming pool and was taken off the street in broad daylight, which kind of seems to be all these girls. Like, it's just middle of the day, and they're just taken.
Which is just insane.
So they didn't know who took her, but they did receive a few statements that were very interesting. So a local resident did notice a suspicious vehicle in the area, and he said it was a white van, and he could remember some of the registration number on it. So with this description of the car, they were able to link it to someone who could fit the profile of the abductor. So the van was registered to a 39-year-old father of 3, unemployed electrician, Marc Dutroux. So they then began questioning him as well as his wife, Michel Martin, and known associate Michel Leverehe. There's a lot of E's in that one, so I know I butchered it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, international listeners.
Us dumb Americans are trying our best over here.
So Dutroux was just not saying anything to the police. So they did turn and focused on the other two. So Michel, the man, was a drifter and addicted to heroin. He caved basically immediately under questioning, and Michelle, the wife, also confessed. And she started to appear to distance herself from her husband. So with these confessions, they now know that Dutroux has taken Leticia. So he eventually is like, okay, you know what? You're right. I did take her. He said 2 of the missing girls are at his house. And so investigators are like, oh, we got to rush there. Way to go. And in a tiny, filthy dungeon hid underneath the house, investigators found Leticia and Sabine still alive. So at this point, Sabine had been missing for 79 days. And they found her alive, which is almost unheard of a lot of times. And Leticia had been missing for 6 days. Both girls were exhausted and terrified, and they were able to reunite the girls with their families in August 1996. So, after further questioning, Dutroux gave more answers about other missing girls in Belgium, and he had obtained 7 houses, which he used as dump sites, basically.
I'm sorry. I had a hard enough time getting 1 house. How the hell do you get 7 of them?
I don't know what kind of magic this man is doing. It's crazy. So, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo had been found buried in the backyard of one of the houses. So, they had starved to death when he had gone to jail for car theft, which we'll bring up a little bit later. And Dutroux had asked his wife, Michelle, to feed them while he was gone, but she said she was too scared to go in the dungeon where he left them. So,
fuck you,
fuck
Michelle.
This bitch.
No. Ew.
I don't know. She infuriated me. Obviously Mark infuriated me because he's a horrible human being, but she just let him do it. Mm-hmm. She was just and that's kind of what they say in the documentary is okay, Michelle may have been scared of Dutroux. Obviously he seems kind of scary guy. But in the end, she's just as responsible.
Yes. And
she could have turned him in, even anonymously. And then obviously at this time, he's in jail.
Yeah.
And she has these 2 little girls alive and could save them or just let them out on the street somewhere random. And she just let them starve to death, which is just a horrible death, too. Yeah. I don't understand.
Michelle is equally responsible for both of their deaths, 100%.
Yeah. And that's the thing, too, is you can be in an abusive relationship, you can be scared. I get that. But if he's in jail and you know you're safe and that if you come forward about this, he'll be in jail longer and the police will help you, you should probably do it.
And it's like, at this point, we're not even talking about her letting them go, which obviously you should have, but you just have to feed them to keep them alive, which is even something that he asked you to do. It's not like you're going against his wishes and so you're afraid that he's going to harm you when he comes back. Like, he told you to do this and you didn't. Mm-hmm. And how is feeding them to keep them alive something that you're going to get in trouble for? That makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, and like we can see with Sabine, like, killing wasn't his number one priority. So these girls could have probably lived, a horrible life, but they could still be alive and hopefully, like, rescued one day.
Exactly. Like, if you fed them, then you would have kept them alive long enough that maybe someone else who wasn't a horrible moron, Michel, could have gotten to them. So,
yeah, obviously I don't understand being with someone like Mark in general, but I also just don't understand, like, I don't want to go down there. I don't want to spend the money to get to them, like, McDonald's. Like, I'll just out of sight, out of mind. Like, I cannot. That is, like, next level horror shit.
Cannot fathom.
Also in this backyard, police found the body of Bernard Weinstein. So Dutroux had confessed to killing Weinstein in a rage because he'd also asked him to feed the girls while he was in jail and even gave him money to do so, but he did not. So he blamed him for their death, and he said he drugged him and buried him alive. So 2 people who could feed these girls, neither of them did it.
Yep.
Not necessarily saying Dutroux was right in killing Weinstein, but also, like, he's responsible for those girls' deaths too.
Yeah, like, all 3 of them are responsible for those girls, 100%.
So 17 days after Dutroux's first confession, he leads police to the bodies of Anne Marchal and Hefe Lambrix. The girls have been drugged and buried alive, which is my worst nightmare.
Like, can you imagine a more horrifying death?
There was a CSI episode kind of about this where a guy was, like, buried alive, like one of the agents or whatever, mm-hmm. and it, like, haunted me for, like, months as a kid because I was just like, that is the most terrifying thing that could ever happen.
Definitely.
So now all 6 missing girls have been found, and inside the house, police found videotapes that included child pornography that he had made with his victims. All of Belgium mourned the loss of these girls, and people put black ribbons on their cars and carried around signs that said, "To death." Now, psychologists really wanted to dive into Dutroux, so many labeled him as a perverted psychopath, but not fundamentally a pedophile, and they came to this conclusion because they didn't believe children were the target of his fantasies. They were just the ones he came across, which I think we've kind of seen this before, where it's not like he's not necessarily attracted to children, like that's not necessarily his fantasy, but they're vulnerable and easy to, like, mm-hmm. control, and so that's who he targets.
Yeah.
I guess is kind of what makes that difference. And they did believe Dutroux's psychopathic tendencies could have started with a turbulent and loveless childhood, and this is why he turned to petty crime that escalated. And Dutroux had a very dominant mother and aggressive father, which is always, like, what we hear in, like, every serial killer all mm-hmm. the time, is just this very dominant mother and aggressive father who probably should have never had kids.
Yeah. So Marc Dutroux was born on November 6th, 1965 in Brussels, and was the eldest of 5 children. His parents were both teachers who immigrated to the Belgian Congo and then returned to Belgium in 1960. They separated in 1971, and Marc stayed with his mother, but he did leave at age 16 and worked briefly in sex work serving men. He married his first wife at the age of 19, and they had 2 children. He did divorce her in 1983, and at this point, he was already having an affair with Michel Martin, and they had 3 children together. So, as we mentioned before, Marc was an unemployed electrician with a long criminal history, including car theft, muggings, and drug dealings. In February of 1986, Marc and Michel were arrested for abducting and raping 5 young girls. In April 1989, he was sentenced to 13 and a half years, and Michel received a sentence of 5 years. And Marc's mother was shocked to learn of his arrest and conviction. She said that he had a normal childhood just like his other siblings, and she didn't know what had caused him to commit these crimes. In one interview, she said, quote, "He was brought up just like the other children. I think there are people that are born with a twisted soul. She had not spoken to him in many years before his arrest, which it didn't really get into, like, why, like, what happened between them, but they weren't really in contact with each other. But afterwards, she said that he was no longer her son, and she would only refer to him as that man or that individual. Like, she wouldn't even call him by his name.
Yeah. And I also want to say, too, when I started researching this, and I was like, wow, they were arrested for abducting and raping 5 young girls. Like, I'm going to go dive into this. And I was like, oh, this is a footnote.
Yeah.
In
You're like,
this story.
Oh,
like,
this isn't the main story.
Yeah. And, like, when you start off research as, like, that as a footnote, you know it's not going to end well.
No. So, Marc and Michel married in 1989 while they were both in prison. But after showing good behavior in prison, Marc was released on parole in April 1992 after having served slightly more than 3 years. If you'll remember, he was arrested for kidnapping and raping 5 girls, and he served 3 years.
3 years. 3.
I can't. So upon releasing Marc, the parole board received a warning letter written by his own mother to the prison director. So she's like, this guy is fucked up. Like, you need to be careful with him. Like, she's like, mm-mm. And the prosecutor for his case also wrote a note in his file that said to be followed very closely because he was afraid that Dutroux would hurt a little girl again.
Which, like, why would you release someone and be like, they're gonna hurt someone again? Like, that logic is just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, like, if you're pretty sure that they're gonna hurt someone again, I think they should still be in prison, especially when they've only served 3 years of their 13-year sentence.
Or, like, go to some, like in-between house or, like, very supervised something. I mean, this guy got out and was able to buy 7 houses. Like,
right? Well, the reason for that, Courtney, is because at this time there were only 47 parole officers total in Belgium, and there was not a single follow-up visit or check-in on Marc after he was released.
Yeah.
Not a single visit. So after his release, he was able to convince a psychiatrist that he was disabled, resulting in a government pension. He also received sleeping pills and sedatives from this doctor, which he would later use to quiet abducted girls.
This is just all fucked up all around. It gets worse, guys. I know you're thinking the worst is over. It's not. But just so much of this is just so fucked up.
Yeah, it really is. So investigators turned to Sabine to understand Dutroux more since she had been with him for 11 weeks. So after being kidnapped, Sabine was driven to a house in Massinel, which was a suburb of Charleroi. Sabine was drugged, led upstairs to the first floor, and chained to a bed. She was given an elaborate story by Dutroux explaining why she had been kidnapped. He said that she had been kidnapped in exchange for ransom and that her parents had refused to pay it. So since they had refused, the people in charge of the kidnapping had given him the okay to execute her, but since he thought she was so nice, he decided to protect her. And he said that in exchange for this, she should grant him some favors, which is, of course, exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Sabine was repeatedly raped by Dutroux, and Sabine's lawyer discussed how Dutroux is someone who just likes to hurt people physically, mentally. He likes to manipulate them. Like, he's just evil, basically.
Yeah.
So as the weeks passed, Sabine was confined to a specially constructed dungeon, which was 3 feet wide by 9 feet long. And she kept a diary for each day, and on the days when Dutroux came and abused her, she drew an X. So 1 X meant that it hurt, and 2 X's meant that it hurt really bad.
Which is just
like, I just can't.
Heartbreaking. I mean, she's like 12, and you know what I mean? Like, she's told this story, and like, she's just being abused and kept in this dungeon that is a tiny dungeon.
Yeah. So Dutroux let her write letters to her parents and said that he was sending them to them. So in her letters, she wrote that she promised to be less selfish, to share her things, to be more helpful, better tempered, and promised her family that she had changed, which is the most heartbreaking thing because she thinks that her family is just refusing to pay the ransom money, and she's like pleading to them like, look, I'll be better, I'll do better.
I'll do the
please
dishes,
take me back.
I'll like make my bed, like I promise. Like, she just thinks her family does not love her anymore, which is so manipulative and abusive. Like, obviously the physical stuff is like horrible, but like this is like earth shattering.
Yeah. And to no one's surprise, Dutroux was not sending these letters to her parents. So, like most children would, Sabine took the lack of rescue as a sign that her parents no longer cared about her. And when she was rescued, she just cried because she honestly thought that her parents didn't want her and they had just accepted her disappearance.
Yeah, there was like videos of her just like bawling her eyes out because she was like, I thought you guys didn't love me anymore, which is like,
yeah,
my heart breaking in a million pieces.
Yeah, definitely. So one family friend commented on Sabine's behavior after her rescue and said that she clung to her mother and that she seemed afraid of her father, which is so sad but also understandable. Yeah. She also stopped playing in the street after returning home.
Again, like we said at the beginning, trauma. Like, how scared you must be to, like, leave the house.
Mm-hmm. As investigations continued, the Belgian public learned that Marc Dutroux's name was in the file less than 2 weeks after Julie and Melissa disappeared. So police had all of this information about these previous arrests and everything and didn't act on it. So Dutroux could have been arrested at this point and lives could have been saved. The victims' families started demanding access to the police files and asking how police could have overlooked all of these important leads. And they pointed out the fact that Dutroux's whole family was living on unemployment checks, yet they owned multiple houses and cars. So, like, how is this happening? Like, how do you not see all these red flags?
And how do you have this guy pop up, and if you look at his file for more than 2 seconds, it's like, watch this guy carefully.
Yeah, exactly. So the police suspected that Dutroux may have been selling child pornography and perhaps even selling children themselves. And at this point, the public learned about Dutroux and Michel's arrest in 1989 and that it was completely predictable that he would relapse. He was just this really powerful ticking time bomb. And from his release in 1992, there were just plenty of warning signs. A police informant told police that he had been asked by Dutroux to help him kidnap a girl and that he was offering $5,200 to do so. Another said that Dutroux had told him he was building cells to hold kidnapped girls. Like we said, Dutroux's own mother tipped off police. She said that he may have been hiding girls in his home. His neighbors had contacted her because they were scared of him. They said that his windows were covered in black plastic and they had seen 2 girls enter the home with him in the middle of the night. And eventually, in August of 1995, police put him under surveillance and a camera was hidden at a railway station in front of his home in Messenel. The camera was in front of the house the night Anne and Yeffe were kidnapped, but the problem was that Dutroux did this kidnapping at night, and police did not have cameras at night. It was only turned on from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. So.
It wasn't even on for 12 hours. Like, how did you think this was really going to help? You really think, like, come on, police, like, use your brain. Turn it on at night.
Police don't operate on banking hours. Like, what? Like, you can't... Oh, well, people only commit crimes from 8 to 5. No.
No, doesn't work that way. Crime has no set work schedule, I guess.
No, definitely not.
So, in December 1995, police were able to come into his home on the basis they believed he'd been involved with some car thefts. So, police were searching his home and even brought a locksmith with them in case he had any, like, locked doors or anything like that. So, suddenly, like, the locksmith was like, I think I hear children's voices. And he's, like, very adamant. He's like, I'm hearing children's voices right here from where I'm standing. Like, I think I hear something. And police just kind of played it off and didn't believe it. But those voices were Julie and Melissa, who would be dead 3 months later. So,
yeah, just let that
the
sink
locksmith
in.
Was right. And the police were like, it's fine. But, like, you know this guy has a history and you know you have missing girls. Why would you not just, like, tear that house to the fucking ground?
Exactly.
Like, and at this point, obviously, I don't know how Belgium parole violations work, but you would have enough cause, I think, to just go in there and be like, I'm ripping this shit out.
You would think so.
So the kidnapping of Julie and Melissa was the top story in Belgium at the time, and the public was told that this was like the highest priority. So you'd think someone with this guy's history, they would look into it a little bit more. And police noted that Dutroux had enlarged one cellar and dug 2 new passages. So Dutroux told police that he was just fixing up his basement, and they just accepted it.
Okay, so again, as you'll remember, we just said that police at this point have already received information that he had made these dungeons to kidnap girls and ask for help. You see this in his home and you don't look into it further. Okay.
You're like, oh yeah, man, I just upgraded my basement too. I put in 3 passages. Can you believe it? No! Like, what the fuck?
Nope.
Also at this police search, police found videotapes but never watched them. So they found these tapes and they're like, we don't have a tape player. In the 90s, you don't have a VCR player? Come on.
Yeah.
We all had
it. You can't go buy one, like, at the street, down the street, at the store, whatever, wherever you buy things.
You're the police. You could probably walk into a store and be like, I need to use this right now. And they'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You don't even have to buy it. So if they had watched these tapes, they would have seen videos of Dutroux building this dungeon and hiding it. So Dutroux had placed shelves with boxes of junk in front of the door to conceal it. So if they'd watched these tapes, they would have known, oh, there's something really fucked up here, but they just let them sit on the shelf and were like, no worries. And, like, they would have known everything in 1995. If they would have, had a tape player. But, like, I'm sorry, no. Like, do your job. Like, don't be lazy here. Like, come on.
There's no excuse for that.
Investigative journalist Douglas DeConnick, who was interviewed a lot in the documentary, also comments how he just does not buy this explanation. Like, basically the whole documentary, anytime the police are like, oh, we just didn't, he's like, no. This is not a thing. No. Even other investigators critiqued the police who searched the house, because if you're looking for 2 8-year-old girls, you should be going all out. So even, like, other investigators, like, later on were like, yeah, this is bad police work. This is bad.
Yeah.
So Dutroux was not arrested for, like, any kidnapping after the search, but he was arrested for car theft and assault while still on probation. However, he was released only a few months later for humanitarian reasons.
Okay.
I think the humanitarian thing to do here is just leave him in jail for the rest of his life.
That would be humanitarian for everyone else.
So Dutroux would later say that when he got home, he checked on Julie and Melissa first thing. One had already died and the other died soon after, which, again, my heart is breaking into a million pieces. Mm-hmm. Especially if whichever one did die first and the other had to watch her friend die and be like, this is what's coming for me, and you have to sit in a dungeon with your best friend's dead body. Like, yeah.
It's horrific.
It's horrible. So after the public hears about police not watching the tapes and Dutroux's quick release from jail, conspiracy theories really start to circulate. We know the public loves a conspiracy theory. So the public is wondering if Dutroux is being protected by powerful people. So while in custody, Dutroux himself put some flames into these conspiracy theories when he says that he's part of a national pedophile network whose tentacles spread all the way to the top of Belgian society. And this statement changed the global interpretation of this case. So eventually more known associates of Dutroux are arrested, including Michel Nehu. So Nehu was a well-connected Belgian businessman and pub owner, and he was a part of the scene of sex parties in the Brussels in the early 80s. And he will go and tell stories of tapes he has that allows him to blackmail the minister because he was involved in some crime. So this guy is like basically like what you think of when you think of the mafia.
Yeah.
Like he's like, I have blackmail on everyone and I can do whatever I want and get whatever I want.
And if we have any Belgian listeners, is Michel a really, really common name, or is this story just crazy? Because there are 3 Michels in this story.
Yeah, and like that's the thing too. I was like, this is going to be so confusing, like speaking it, because like there's Michel, who's like Michelle, his wife, and then there's 2 Michels who are Michel, and yeah. I'm like, this is going to get confusing when I'm saying it out loud.
Very confusing. We'll try to use last names.
Yeah. So one of Dutroux's Italian associates was also poisoned the month before his home was searched, and many believe he was responsible. After a public appeal, 11 previous victims of Dutroux came forward, and they're as known as the X-witnesses, and each are given a code name. So, for example, X1 is Regina Loof. She said she saw him on TV being yelled at and how it was a very strange experience. Regina is now a mother of 4, but she recognized Marc Dutroux and Michel Nehu from her childhood. So Regina's mother had a boyfriend who would sell her to groups of men for sex work, and this is where she met Nehu. The parties were organized for other pedophiles, and they would take several children and would rape them, as well as take pictures and make videos. Regina said the men going to these parties were big businessmen who would also be politicians. And Regina said Marc would frequently accompany Nehu to these parties. So, if this story is true, investigators have just stumbled across an actual network of pedophiles who include prominent members of Belgian society. And you also have a girl who is a part of, was a part of it unwillingly, confirming it. So it's like, this could have just opened, the biggest of things. This is like Jeffrey Epstein before, well, he was probably conducting around this time too, but this is like Jeffrey Epstein before the public knew about it.
Yeah, definitely.
So Rudy Hoskins was the investigator who was taking Regina's statement and investigating it. And Regina talked about how, many high society people, even including police officers who were at these parties. So this is going to kind of come into this, is Dutroux being protected? So Rudy was very skeptical of Regina and didn't really believe her, it seemed. And Regina said, I understand why people are skeptical, but the only thing she asked from them was to do their job and to look for clues and evidence that backed her statement. She's like, I know I'm telling the truth, and I know if you, do your job and research it, you'll also see I'm telling the truth.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And also, Regina is able to provide a lot of details about the unsolved murder of Christine Van Hees, whose body was found on a farm in the outskirts of Brussels in 1984. So they found evidence in the autopsy of Christine's body that corroborated her story. She could correctly tell them how Christine had been bound and things that had been done to her that was not known to the public at that time. So these details really made Rudy start to believe that there could be some truth to her story, and it did seem that people could be afraid of her statement as well. So if this is true, then there really is this pedophile ring that's being protected by the authorities.
And it is crazy that, a lot of people like to say Regina is delusional and crazy and wants attention and all this, but she has details that the public does not know, that she would only know if something if she was involved in something like this.
Yeah, you can't ignore that. So then problems arise in the case in October 1996 when the person investigating Dutroux, Judge Jean-Marc Connerat, was fired. So he attended a dinner with the victims of Dutroux's families, and this was deemed a conflict of interest. So Rudy Hoskins and all other investigators working with the ex-witnesses were told their investigation was coming to an end. They believed they were going too far for some people, and now the public is really not feeling confident in the Dutroux investigation, obviously. And at this time, it was also revealed by 2 members of parliament that police had destroyed key files in the case back in September. So many people at this time started coming forward about abuse during their own childhoods and how they reported it to their villages and the local police, and they were never taken seriously. So this is just this common theme in Belgium that they've reported this child sexual abuse that police have just completely ignored.
Mm-hmm.
So Douglas DeConnick, the investigator mentioned earlier, said in the documentary that in his 15 years of reporting, he could count hundreds of judges who had dinners with families or lawyers or all sorts of people, even suspects. It happens all the time. And on October 20th, 1996, a huge march is led by the families of Dutroux's victims. 300,000 people marched through Brussels, workers went on strike, firemen turned their water hoses on government buildings to be symbolic of cleansing out the corruption.
Which was amazing to me, watching the documentary. Seeing these firemen be like, no, we ain't having this.
Fuck this.
We ain't doing this.
Yeah. So in 1998, Dutroux was escorted to the courthouse to review pretrial documents. And when they took his handcuffs off so that he could pick up the documents, he stole an officer's gun and escaped. So he's just pulling a Ted Bundy.
We just got some Barney Fives in here.
Yep. So this launched a manhunt with more than 5,000 police officers and 20 helicopters. So Dutroux made it several miles away in a stolen car before being spotted by a forest guard. So police were called in, and Dutroux immediately dropped his weapon and surrendered. So this, along with the many other police mishaps in this case, led to the resignation of the Justice and Interior Ministers and Chief of Police, all effective on the day of Dutroux's escape. So while Belgium is on the brink of revolution, Dutroux is still maintaining that he is just a small pawn in a huge conspiracy. His surviving victims are preparing for their day in court, and Marc and Michel divorced in 2003. So in 2004, Sabine, who is now 20 years old, and Leticia, who is now 22, were going to have to face Dutroux again in court. So this trial would be against Marc Dutroux, Michel Martin, Michel Nehu, and Michel
Leverehe? You have to leave that in. That's good.
And Michel Leverehe. Close enough. Not really sorry, Michelle, because you're a piece of shit too, so it's okay.
Yeah.
It has taken 8 years to bring Dutroux to trial because investigators have had to investigate the hundreds of leads about this pedophile network that they don't believe exists. So the public was still divided on whether Dutroux was a lone predator or part of this bigger network. And Marcel's father, Paul, does not believe that Dutroux acted alone. Even more suspicious, there are at least 3 witnesses who were police informants or associates who were supposed to testify against Dutroux, but went missing, and most turned up dead right before they were supposed to reveal what they knew. In all, 20 people with connections to the case have died in suspicious circumstances. 20.
Yeah, like that is crazy. They go more into it in the documentary. We were already kind of at a long episode, so I just didn't really include all of these people, but they go through like at least like 3 or 4 who it's like it was very, very, very suspicious. Like they were clearly probably murdered.
Yeah. So when asked about her decision to testify, Sabine said, "I want to look Dutroux in the eye and make him understand that despite everything he made me suffer, I did not go insane." Which, you were just such a badass. So Regina Louf did not testify. The whole investigation was halted for what reason? No one knows. Rudy Haskins says that it makes no sense because they were just doing their jobs and being objective, and they were just told to drop the case. So Regina was interviewed by a second group of investigators, and her testimony was dismissed. This group of investigators told Regina that she was full of it and sick in the head and just wanted attention. So by the time of the trial, she's dismissed as a pathological liar. And again, like we said, she had all these details that no one else knew. So how are we just dismissing her testimony?
Yeah. Definitely like fishy. Yeah. Since like the one investigator was like getting onto something, and suddenly it's like, oh, well, this judge had dinner with the victims' families, which every judge in the history of every single case has basically done. And they're like, oh, conflict of interest, gotta cancel it. Like,
very weird.
Isn't it his job to work with the victims' families? Like, I'm assuming he's basically like the DA in this case. Like, come on now.
Yeah, so Sabine's lawyer did not believe the ex-witnesses contributed anything to the trial. He believes that Dutroux acted alone, especially since he kept Sabine to himself for 79 days and did not try to sell her to the supposed pedophile ring. So he just doesn't find it likely. And Dutroux has never offered any details about the ring that he says that he served. So on June 17th, 2004, Marc Dutroux is found guilty of the abduction and rape of 6 girls and killing 4 of them. He was sentenced to life in prison, and Leverehe is found guilty of kidnapping and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Michel Martin is found guilty of conspiracy to kidnap and sentenced to 30 years in prison. So she was not convicted of murder, mind you, which she 100% should have been.
Oh, she should have been. She should have been, like, just as bad as Mark.
Yeah.
Like, fuck her.
So Nehu was convicted of drug offenses, but not of being an accomplice of Dutroux. So investigators claim that Dutroux acted alone and that there is no evidence of a pedophile ring or a conspiracy in Belgium. However, not everyone agrees and still believe that there is a bigger cover-up that's occurring here. He really should have been arrested earlier, and it seems that we'll just never know if this was bad police work or an intentional cover-up.
Because it's kind of hard for me, too, to, like, know what I believe. Like,
yeah.
Part of me does believe in this pedophile ring, because it's like, how did Dutroux fly so far under the radar?
Yeah.
And how did these girls know all this information? You know, so I kind of believe it. But there are some things like Sabine's lawyer brought up where it's like, well, why didn't he sell Sabine? Like, why was it just him? But maybe he just liked her a lot and kept them. I mean, he did build a dungeon, so maybe he literally was trying to hide them from the pedophile ring because he's a selfish monster who wants them all to himself.
Yeah, like maybe these are just the ones that we know about. Like maybe there were many more that he did kidnap and sell to this pedophile ring. But like you said, he, for whatever reason, really liked these girls and wanted to keep them to himself. Like, it's not unheard of that you could do both, that you could be part of this pedophile ring and then also doing stuff on your own.
Mm-hmm.
So Michelle Martin was released from prison in August of 2012 after serving less than half of her 30-year sentence. She was released to a convent, and the country just erupted in protest at the news that she was being let out.
Which good, because
yes.
Fuck her. Again, it's just insane to me. I hope it's like that one case in Canada where the girl was basically found afterwards to be like just as culpable, and like people just literally find her wherever she goes and like calls where she's working and being like, hey, by the way, did you know that she basically murdered and like helped this guy rape all these women?
Yeah.
I hope that happens. I always say like, oh, be nice to people, don't wish bad, but I wish bad upon Michelle Martin because fuck you.
Definitely. And I'm really glad too that the public was like aware of this and like this is
not trying to like excuse her. Yeah,
this is still something that everyone like keeps tabs on. So as soon as they found this out, they're like, nope, back to the streets, like protest this again. Yep. I don't care how long it's been.
Come on, firemen, get your hoses. We're going.
Belgium is not having this. So Marc Dutroux was up for early release in 2013, but his request was denied. And in 2019, when he had been in prison and solitary confinement for 23 years at this point, with the time he spent before his trial and everything, he did win an appeal to have a new psychiatrist examine him to see if he is still a threat to society. So even this possibility of him being released prompted new protests in Belgium. So he hasn't even gone through the evaluation yet, and they're already protesting because they're like, nope. So
I feel like this is the phrase like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Like, yeah, okay, the first time, you're right, shame on you that you took this, whatever. Second time, no, you need to be smarter. Like, do not let him fool you again.
Exactly. So this evaluation was scheduled for May of 2020, but it had to be delayed because the prisoner was not allowing any outside visitors due to COVID. So one positive thing that came out of COVID. But the evaluation was completed in October, at which point his lawyers said they were dropping the proposal for early release because the results were so bad. Like,
you know that's bad if they're like, ooh.
If your own lawyer is like, never mind, you know whatever came back was really bad. So the psychiatrist noted that his narcissism and lack of empathy pointed towards a psychopathic profile and that he should remain in a strict and closed environment because he remains potentially dangerous and presents a high risk of recidivism. So they're like, this man should never be let out of prison, which, again, we know now. Like, we realized this the first time. How is this even a question still? I don't understand.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, Marc Dutroux is just a monster.
Yeah.
And he is just, he will never change. And I fully believe that prison should be to, reform and not necessarily just stick people in there for the rest of their life. But sometimes in cases like this with Marc Dutroux, like, he is just an awful human being who will never change, who will continue hurting people, and he should remain somewhere where he can just never be alone, basically.
Like, he got another chance and he proved that he would do this again. Like, this isn't, we don't need to see it play out again and again. Like, he got that second chance and it was shown, okay, clearly you cannot be a member of society, so this is where you have to stay now for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and We do want to remember those victims because they're the ones who matter. And so it was Julie Lejeune, Melissa Rousseau, and Marcel Hefe Lambrix. They are the ones who died. I guess also Bernard Weinstein also was a victim. And also Sabine Jardin and Leticia Delhay, who were also victims of him and had to deal with the fact that this trial did not go for many, many years, having to constantly have that in their mind. Even now today with Dutroux, like, trying to be, like, released, that has to be traumatic. Like, and just the countless, I mean, the 5 girls that he had raped that he was in jail for before. I mean, there's probably so many victims that we can't even name or don't even know about of just this monster.
Yeah, definitely. And like we said, neither of us had heard of this one. I feel like a lot of podcast or documentaries, like we've talked about before, they do tend to stay away from the child ones because they are so difficult, which we completely understand, but we also feel like their stories deserve to be told as well. So if you guys have stayed with us this long, thank you. We know it's hard. We know it's very hard to listen to. If you skipped the whole episode and you just came to the end to see what our perk of the week is, welcome back, and that's okay. But
yeah, also thank you, Jenny, for the recommendation. Yes. I know at the beginning I was like, oh, what are you listening to? But it wasn't a very important story and should be told. So thank you so much. We love recommendations.
Yes, definitely. Like we said, we really want to make sure, and that's something we talk about a lot too, that we want to cover these cases that are not widely covered. Because we want their stories to be told and to be out there.
Yes.
So now that this monstrosity is over, Courtney, what is your perk of the week? I hope it's a good one, no pressure.
It's a good one to me. So my perk of the week is my hockey team, the Nashville Predators, have officially clinched a playoff spot.
Oh.
I'm very happy. So at the beginning of the season, Kevin and I were talking about this last night, at the beginning of the season, literally we were like, it might be a rebuild year. Like, they literally might basically cut every good player on the team and start over because we're so bad. And then something happened and the team started winning, and they were like on these stretches of winning, and we literally were like 10 points out. So if you don't know hockey, every win you get is 2 points, obviously 0 points for a loss, and if you lose in overtime you get 1 point. So we were like 10 points out with like more games than like people ahead of us, and we somehow rised up and clinched that playoff spot. So hopefully by the time you're hearing this that we're not eliminated yet, but hopefully we don't go out in the first round because it's going to be a tough one. We're playing a good team, but I am just so excited to see my team go on into the playoffs, and I want a Stanley Cup so bad. I want it, especially for one of my favorite Predators, who is Pekka Rinne, the goalie. He's getting kind of old. I want a Stanley Cup for him because he's fucking incredible. So I don't know if that's interesting to anyone, but it is a huge perk of the week for me. Anyone who knows me knows how much I love hockey. So
yeah, that is super exciting and a very nice perk of the week.
Yes, so that is my perk of the week. Jacqueline, what is your perk of the week?
So my perk of the week, as you guys know, I mentioned a few weeks ago that Andrew and I planted our first garden. And so as of this week, we have like 5 blackberries, a few blueberries, a tomato, and a pepper that are all growing. So things are happening in the garden. Haven't tried any of them yet because, you know, they're still growing, but there's something other than just the plant there. So super excited about that. Hopefully they will continue and we can actually eat this produce that we are producing. So yeah, so that is my perk of the week, and Andrew's been doing such a great job of keeping up with the garden, and we also got a bunch of hydrangeas yesterday that we planted out in front of our front porch, and it looks really pretty, and they're supposed to last a long time and get bigger, so hopefully that happens and we don't kill them. And yeah, so just enjoying all of the outdoor spring things happening right now, basically.
Yeah, my dad planted potatoes, and he said they're doing really well, especially after we had some rain. And since this is like a depressing episode, I have to tell you guys the cutest story about my nephew. So my nephew is obsessed with French fries. I swear he could eat French fries like every meal. And my dad makes like these homemade French fries that are just like the best fries I've ever had in my life, basically. And so my nephew was like helping my dad when he was like, raking the garden. And my dad was like, I'm planting potatoes, and when they grow, I'll make you some French fries.
Oh.
So in Eli's like 3-year-old brain, he started going, I'm raking some French fries. So he was like in the garden raking, being like, I'm raking some French fries.
That's adorable. I love it.
Yeah. So since we had a lot of like depressing kid stuff, I was like, I'm going to tell this story because it was cute. So gardens are exciting. Kevin really wants to somehow see if here we can get like somehow to grow raspberries, because I've been spending so much money on raspberries because Kevin loves them, which like I was telling my mom, I'm like, he eats them, so I don't really care if I'm spending like $12 a week on raspberries because he'll eat it. Like, it's not going to waste. But yeah, he's addicted to raspberries.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before. That may not have been on the podcast. But anyway, I also love berries. Raspberries are like my least favorite berries, but like I still like them. But I've been eating a ton of blackberries, strawberries, blueberries this spring. And, I'm sure the ones that we planted won't grow too many. But maybe, it'll save us a little bit of,
Yeah. It'll be nice. You can just go outside and pick one.
Exactly. I'll just have one. And farmers markets are coming back soon. So for the ones that, to supplement our little garden, we can go buy some local produce from people who have much better gardens. So that's fun too.
Yeah. And if you want to tell us about your garden, what your niece or nephew said that was absolutely adorable, about who your favorite hockey team is, you can do so at Instagram at Caffeinated Crimes Pod. You can do so on Twitter at Caff Crimes Pod. That's CAFF Crimes Pod. You can do so on Facebook. That's Caffeinated Crimes Podcast. A little bit more professional for the Facebook. You can send us an email at caffeinatedcrimespod@gmail.com. And if you feel so inclined, you can give us a little donation each month, and we'll provide you with lots of goodies. We have bonus episodes, we have Q&As, we have a video episode or two, maybe just one because we're not good at videos, but you might get a pin, a sticker, you'll get a shout out on an episode, you'll hear your name right here in the airwaves. So if you want all that and to just kind of come and be able to talk to us like on a more like private whatever, you can do so at patreon.com/caffeinatedcrimes.
And we are always open to suggestions on things that you guys want. So if you are not a patron yet and you're like, oh, maybe you guys could do this cool thing for patrons, let us know what ideas you have, because we are totally open to that as well.
If you're like, if you did this, I'd be a Patreon. Well, we'll start doing that, buddy.
Maybe.
We'll do it.
Depends on what it is. Don't make any promises,
I won't
Courtney.
post my nudes. I will not post my nudes. I draw the line.
But that's pretty much it. Other than
that.
Again, if you guys want a sticker, a pin, and a gift card to a coffee shop of your choice, make sure you enter our contest over on Apple Podcast, where we are looking for 50 reviews. Not even close to that yet. Come on, guys. Step it up. We know you're listening. Please leave us the reviews. It helps a lot. And once we reach those 50, we will draw someone to win those 3 items. So head on over and do that as soon as possible, because, again, we appreciate it and it would be very helpful.
And who doesn't love free stuff? Come on now. Who doesn't love free stuff? But in the meantime, go have a cup of coffee.
And don't commit a crime.